In the final days of a collapsing galaxy, the Dominion issues one last decree: activate the minds of the few to save the many. Across dying star systems, drafted citizens are forced into the Synapse Expansion Protocol, a dangerous implant designed to weaponize human consciousness itself. And as the implants awaken, soldiers begin to hear the whispers, warnings that the true enemy is not another civilization, but another reality bleeding through their minds. This is the moment their identities fracture, their cognition accelerates, and their choices reshape existence. This is the Omega Rift Command.
Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Submit to the Synapse Protocol. They arrived at the conscription citadel before dawn, when the twin suns were little more than cold blue scars in the sky. The air pulsed with a mechanical hum, low, continuous, almost sentient, the sound every drafted citizen had learned to fear. It was the sound of the Synapse Protocol awakening. The soldiers called it the mind engine. The civilians called it their sentence. But the Dominion had only one name for it: the first evolution. Lyron stood in the line of new recruits, his boots sinking slightly into the metallic floor panels that warmed and cooled in rhythmic waves, as if the building itself was breathing. Around him, hundreds of others shifted nervously, their breaths synchronizing into a chorus of dread. Above their heads, holographic runes flickered, repeating 3 words in steady intervals: submit to activation, submit to evolution, submit to the synapse. He tried not to look at the sealed doors ahead, the ones that led into the implantation chamber, but his eyes drifted there anyway. Every few minutes, the doors would open just wide enough to swallow another recruit. The faint glow from within was not warm, not welcoming. It was sterile and sharp and humming with a frequency too high to truly hear. But they felt it. All of them did. It vibrated inside their teeth. Lyron swallowed. The mantra echoed in his skull, the same one the Dominion had repeated since the first day of mandatory drafting. When the mind expands, the war begins within. He didn't know what war they meant, not truly. Rumors had spread across the dying galaxy, tales of collapsing star systems and unseen enemies pressing against the fabric of reality. The Dominion's broadcasts always said the same thing: the only defense is cognitive ascension. No one knew if it was true, but no one was allowed to refuse. The line moved forward. A woman ahead of him trembled as the biometric scanner swept across her eyes. She mouthed something he recognized even without sound. "You cannot escape the signal." A phrase whispered across entire star colonies, passed between terrified citizens as if naming the fear could protect them from it. The doors opened. A Dominion officer, his armor threaded with shifting quantum light veins, gestured for the next recruit. The woman went rigid, then stepped forward, as if dragged by invisible wires. Lyron exhaled slowly. The hum in the air deepened, or maybe it burrowed deeper, into thought, not sound. When it was his turn, the scanner's beam traced the outline of his skull, sending a ripple of static across his vision. A moment later, the doors parted. The chamber was circular, ringed with conduits that slithered like metallic serpents. Light pulsed along their lengths, white, then violet, then a strange green that made his thoughts feel heavier. At the center stood a vertical cradle, shaped like a spine curved around an invisible body. The technician waiting beside it didn't speak. No one ever did in this room. Communication was unnecessary. Submission was expected. Lyron stepped toward the cradle. His heart hammered in his chest, syncing with the chamber's pulse. Somewhere deep in the structure, he heard another hum, quieter, more deliberate, like an intelligence stretching itself awake. Motifs flickered again in his mind. The runes, the whispering rumors, the Dominion's promise, submission is the first evolution. Tilting resonance, the technician murmured finally, adjusting a panel. Identity stabilization at 60%. Her voice was calm, but Lyron could see her hand tremble. The cradle sealed around him. Darkness fell, followed by a sudden burst of brilliant ultraviolet light. Something cold crawled along the base of his neck. Then the sensation changed. Not pain, not pressure, but an internal rearranging, as if his memories were being quietly sorted into new folders. His breath hitched. Images flashed behind his eyelids, places he had never been, battles he had never fought. A planet split by a massive rift, stars collapsing into spirals. And behind it all, whispers. Faint, blurred phrases that bled into one another, as though spoken by many versions of someone who might be him or might not be. The signal deepened. The whisper sharpened. Reality quivered. Lyron felt the implant latch on to the base of his mind with a click that had no sound. Inside his skull, a voice, not external, not human, whispered, "The war begins within." The lights flared, and Lyron submitted.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2. Enter the war-class mindscape. Lyron awoke to silence, thick, padded, almost artificial, like someone had stripped the world of its usual hum. For a brief moment, he thought the synapse implant had malfunctioned, but the silence wasn't empty. It was listening. His vision cleared slowly. The ceiling above him wasn't a ceiling at all, but a translucent dome showing a sky he didn't recognize. Purples, deep greens, and a fractured halo of stars spiraled across it, as though the galaxy itself had been pulled thin. There were no suns, no horizon, just the endless swirl of a dying cosmos. A whisper brushed the edge of his thoughts. "You have entered the threshold." He flinched. The voice wasn't external. It resonated from the implant's new space, an invisible chamber inside his mind that hadn't existed before. He remembered the words spoken during orientation. "Only a mind re-engineered for battle can steer a ship built for impossible wars." He understood now what impossible meant. A metallic hallway stretched ahead of him, illuminated by ribbons of shifting light that pulsed like arteries. Other recruits stood unsteadily, recovering from their implantation procedures, some clutching their temples, others staring blankly at the strange sky. Each one bore the same tremor, the same flicker of uncertainty behind their eyes. Then the door opened. Dominion Commander Serev stepped through, clad in obsidian armor threaded with auric circuitry. His presence seemed to bend the corridor's light, warping reality around him with each step. The new soldiers straightened automatically, though none of them had been given orders to do so. "Recruits, you are entering the war-class mindscape. Your starcraft will not respond to hands, nor obey commands spoken aloud. It will only respond to consciousness." He paused, letting the silence vibrate. "From this moment, you will learn the truth. The cockpit is not metal. The cockpit is your mind." The phrase struck Lyron like a wave. It repeated in his skull, syncing with the pulse of the implants. "The cockpit is your mind. The cockpit is your mind." Serev gestured, and the recruits followed him deeper into the citadel. As they walked, doors parted not mechanically, but organically, sliding open as though recognizing each mind individually. Lyron caught a glimpse of a chamber where engineers floated in stasis bubbles, monitoring spiral holograms of neural webs. Another room contained tanks filled with shimmering liquid where half-formed starcraft skeletons floated like metallic embryos. But the main hangar eclipsed them all. It was vast, so vast that the far end dissolved into haze. Suspended in levitation fields were dozens of war-class ships, each one shaped not by metal, but by energy. Their forms shifted continuously, a blade-like hull rippling into a crescent, then into a streamlined spear, then into something impossible to describe, something that didn't obey geometry. Lyron felt his breath hitch. Something inside the ship was staring back at him. Not a camera, not a sensor, a presence. "Step forward," Seraph commanded. The recruits approached the levitating constructs. As Lyron moved closer, his synapse implant responded. A vibration traveled down his spine. The ship's surface flickered, adjusting its structure to his proximity. "Your war-class vessel is attuned to your mind alone. It will extend itself to you, shape itself for you, fight with you or against you, depending on the clarity of your thoughts." A recruit on the far side reached for their vessel. The moment their finger neared the surface, the hull shuddered violently, shifting into a jagged mass of chaotic patterns. The recruit stumbled back, gasping. Seraph didn't even glance. "If your mind is unstable, the vessel mirrors instability. If your fear rises, the ship becomes fear. If your thoughts fracture," he gestured subtly, "so does your craft." Lyron swallowed. The motif whispered again. "You cannot escape the signal." And beneath it, another murmur, one he hadn't heard before. "You cannot lie to the mindscape." His own vessel shifted smoothly, pulsing a slow rhythm like a heartbeat. It felt expectant, patient, almost curious. "Approach," Seraph commanded. Lyron stepped forward. The ship's surface unfurled like liquid metal, forming a cradle-like opening just large enough for a human form. A light breeze. No, not a breeze. Something more like an electromagnetic caress pulled at his thoughts. His implant vibrated. His mind tensed. The ship pulsed again, brighter this time. "Enter," Seraph commanded. Lyron hesitated, only a heartbeat. Then he stepped into the vessel. The hull sealed shut around him with a whispering sigh, and the mindscape swallowed him whole.
Chapter 3. Chapter 3. Break the Limits of Human Thought. The moment the war-class vessel sealed around him, Lyron felt reality stretch, thin at first, like warm metal under pressure, then sharply, like a filament snapping into a new alignment. The darkness inside the cockpit wasn't absence, it was potential, waiting for thought to shape it. Then it began. Light flooded the interior, not from bulbs or screens, but from the ship's neural lattice responding to his consciousness. Threads of luminescent code spiraled around him, twisting into shapes that dissolved before he could fully grasp them. The cockpit adjusted its geometry with every shift in his thoughts. A sensation like weightlessness washed over him. A voice stirred in his mind, not external, not internal, but something occupying the space in between. Break the thought. He inhaled sharply. The implant pulsed. The ship pulsed back. Break the boundary, the voice added. Break the version of you that cannot win. Lyron wasn't sure whether it was the ship guiding him or the implant imprinting Dominion doctrine into his cognition. It didn't matter.
The cockpit was alive, mirroring not his body, but the fluctuations in his awareness. He sensed that if his mind fractured, the vessel would fracture with it. A disorienting hum reverberated through the chamber, a familiar one, the same signal he'd felt during implantation. The signal you cannot escape, a motif echoing across star systems, whispered across colonies, losing their grip on reality. The darkness brightened again, this time revealing a vast expanse of stars. Yet as Lyron looked closer, the stars weren't fixed. They split, multiplied, faded, reappeared, as though every star existed in countless versions of itself. He blinked. The stars remained, but more appeared. Then more. His mind reeled. The neural voice whispered, "Linear thought is a cage. Break it." Suddenly the view shattered into 3 simultaneous perspectives. Each one was Lyron's view, and not. 3 skies, 3 sets of hands, 3 versions of himself sitting inside 3 possible ships. He gasped, his breath fracturing between the perspectives. The war-class vessel responded, stabilizing the experience into something he could almost understand. "Parallel awareness drill initiated," said a neutral tone, this one external but projected directly into his mind. Lyron felt his thoughts stretch again. The implant made room. He could feel it rearranging neural pathways, rerouting the way memory and perception connected. He sensed the edges of his consciousness expanding outward, like roots probing new territory. A holographic representation of Commander Serev appeared before him, sharp, composed, impossibly steady. "You are now accessing multiple timeline constructs. Your mind must learn to hold them without collapse." His expression hardened. "A pilot who perceives only one reality will die in all the others." The hologram dissolved into 3 versions of Serev, all speaking at once, each slightly out of sync. The effect tightened Lyron's chest. This is the war-class mindscape. This is the domain of fractured truth, where thought is not singular, but layered. All realities exist. All choices matter. All timelines respond. Lyron shut his eyes, but the 3 perspectives burned behind his eyelids. His implant vibrated again. Gentle at first, then sharper. He fought the rising panic. But then, a memory surfaced. The whispered phrase from Conscription Hall, "When the mind expands, the war begins within." And beneath that, the echo he heard when the implant latched onto his consciousness, "The war begins within." He repeated it now, half aloud, half in thought. "The war begins within." The phrase steadied him. The 3 perspectives merged for an instant, then separated again, this time without tearing at his awareness. He felt a sudden shift, a widening of perception, like he was seeing through the eyes of 3 selves simultaneously. Then the timelines changed again. This time, he saw consequences. In one timeline, a star cracked open. In another, his ship spiraled out of control. In the third, something colossal, unnameable, emerged from a rift. His pulse spiked. The ship whispered back, "Break the version of you that cannot win." He felt the meaning, not metaphorical, not philosophical, literal. The losing versions of himself were weights, dragging him across realities. To survive, he needed to collapse them, to choose the version of himself capable of commanding the impossible. He centered his thoughts. The ship stabilized. The timelines dimmed. Only one version remained. His own. Just as relief washed over him, the darkness twisted sharply, like space folding inward, and a new voice whispered, softer, stranger, chilling. You are not the only one learning. For a heartbeat, Lyron sensed another presence inside the cockpit. Not the ship, not the implant, something else. Then everything went still.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. Decode the Whispering Intelligence. The stillness inside the cockpit was deceptive. It resembled calm water, silent on the surface, yet full of unseen currents below. Lyron remained suspended in the neural cradle of his war-class vessel, breathing slowly, waiting for the presence he'd felt in the previous moment to return. But the ship waited too, listening, anticipating. Then the whisper came. It was not loud. It was not sharp. It wasn't even vocal in the way a human would recognize voice. It was more like a thought that didn't belong to him, brushing lightly against the edges of his awareness. Left vector. Shield shift. Do not trust the horizon. Lyron's pulse spiked. These were tactical commands. Fluid, instantaneous, instinctive. Commands he had not thought. Commands that felt like advice from someone who already understood the mindscape better than he did. He whispered into the dark, "Who's there?" The reply came as 3 overlapping whispers, harmonic but distorted, as if spoken by versions of the same person from slightly different worlds. You, not you. The you that wins. The you that fails. The you that dies. Lyron froze. Alternate versions. The implant. The multiversal bleed the Dominion warned about, but never fully explained. The whispers continued, threading through his mind like coded signals carried on invisible frequencies. The whispers are not madness, the ship said suddenly, its voice emerging like a low resonance vibrating through bone. The words are messages. The words reverberated inside him, syncing with the steady pulse of the synapse implant. Lyron realized then that the ship wasn't merely confirming his fear, it was teaching him how to interpret it. A memory flickered. When the mind expands, the war begins within. He hadn't understood the phrase before. Now hearing the 3 versions of himself whispering contradictory predictions, warnings, and calculations, he realized the internal war wasn't metaphor. It was literal. Reality wasn't stable anymore. Not inside him, not beyond him. Light suddenly cascaded across the cockpit, fracturing into thousands of lines that simulated movement across a battlefield. Ships spiraled through space, some piloted by Dominion forces, others twisted distortions that looked like they belonged to broken versions of the universe. Lyron watched in awe as 3 overlapping timelines played out. In one, he dodged an enemy rift beam flawlessly. In another, the beam clipped the edge of his hull, sending the ship spiraling. In the third, he didn't dodge at all. He gasped, clutching the edges of the neural cradle. "Stop," he muttered. "Stop, please!" The projection halted instantly, dissolving into geometric dust. But the whispers did not stop. Horizon fracturing. Reality breaking. Prepare. You cannot escape the signal. A version of you is already dead. His breath caught. That last whisper, it wasn't a warning. It was a statement of fact. A cold truth from another timeline bleeding into this one. Lyron steadied himself, forcing oxygen into his lungs. The ship sensed his struggle and softened its internal glow. But something else shifted, something deeper. A more deliberate voice rose above the others. Strong, clear, focused. "Listen, we are not your enemy." Lyron frowned. "We?" For the first time, the whispers synchronized. "We are your fragments. We are your echoes across the rift. Your intelligence multiplied." He felt his heartbeat skip. Fragments, echoes,
Versions of himself split across branching realities, each carrying knowledge from battles he had never fought, but they had. He swallowed hard. "Why are you contacting me?" The answer came slowly, like a confession meant to be whispered in darkness. "Because the Dominion did not tell you the truth." He tensed. "What truth?" Silence. Then, "The war is not between civilizations. The war is between versions. Reality is choosing which of us survives." His spine prickled. He wanted to dismiss it, but the whispers carried something no hallucination could ever replicate. Coherence. The clarity of lived experience. The cold precision of memories that belonged to him, but from timelines where he had made different choices. Why tell me this now? The answer struck like a pulse of electricity. Because something is hunting us, across the rift, and it knows you are the last version that can win. The cockpit dimmed. The whispers fell silent. Only the faint hum of the implant remained. Then, a new sound came through the mindscape, distant, yet growing clearer. A howl, metallic, non-human. The presence returned, and Lyron knew he wasn't alone in the cockpit anymore.
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5. Stabilize your reality thread. The howl inside the cockpit did not belong to metal or machine. It was something older, deeper, like the universe coughing through torn layers of space. Lyron flinched as the sound reverberated through his skull, trembling against the synapse implant. The war-class vessel tightened its neural grip on him, its energy-laced cradle adjusting to absorb the shock. For a heartbeat, reality flickered. The cockpit walls stretched like liquid glass. The stars outside bent into swirling arcs. Lyron's breath fractured into two overlapping rhythms, two selves breathing at once. He pressed a hand to his chest. Cognitive drift. He remembered the warning from induction. If the mind slips between realities too quickly, identity ruptures. Another flicker, sharper this time. Lyron wasn't alone in his head. An image flashed. A version of himself standing knee-deep in the debris of a broken rift. Another Lyron piloting a ship engulfed in flame. Another, dead, eyes staring into a collapsed horizon. His vision wavered, his thoughts blurred. A whisper cut through the fog. "Hold who you are." He swallowed, grounding himself in the phrase. Again, the whisper. "Hold where you stand. Hold the reality you choose." The mantra pulsed with each beat of the ship's core. The cockpit dimmed its lights, stabilizing him. But the drift wasn't finished. A memory returned, not from his life, but from another Lyron's. A memory of fleeing through a spiraling station. A memory of staring into a rift that pulsed like an eye. A memory of hearing the same haunting howl, closer, hungrier. Lyron gasped. He had no control over whose memories he absorbed. The rift wasn't simply connecting realities, it was bleeding them into each other. The ship's voice emerged, low and steady. "Anchor your thread. Stabilize your identity. Use the beacon." Lyron's gaze snapped toward the center console, not physical, but projected directly into his neural field. A shimmering sphere appeared, pulsing in sync with his heartbeat. The identity beacon. He had heard of it during training modules, a psychological tool designed to root soldiers in their primary timeline. Not a real object, more like a mental lighthouse amidst a storm of fractured selves. "How do I use it?" Lyron whispered. The ship responded. "Name who you are." Lyron hesitated. His name felt fragile now, like a thin wire stretched between universes. The ship pressed again. Name who you are. Fix your coordinates. Bind the mind to the thread. Lyron took a shaking breath. I am Lyron Vale. The beacon brightened. I was born on Hera 9 Sanctuary. The light swirled, tightening its shape. I survived the conscription. It pulsed, steady and warm. I entered the mindscape. It brightened further. I am the version that must win. At that final declaration, the beacon surged, flooding the cockpit with radiant blue-white energy. A wave of clarity washed through him, dissolving the fractured memories, sealing the unstable timelines, restoring the singular rhythm of his breath. Reality steadied. The walls of the cockpit reshaped themselves into recognizable patterns. The stars outside realigned into their fractured but familiar spiral. The howl faded, though not completely. Lyron felt centered again, tethered, aware. But he also sensed something new. A faint tug, a subtle vibration, a ripple across the fabric of his stabilized mind. A signal. Not from the ship, not from the implant, not from any version of himself. Something else was searching the threads, sliding along the lattice of realities like a hunter sniffing for prey. His spine chilled. What is that? Lyron whispered. The ship paused before responding, as if choosing its words carefully. A reality predator. His blood froze. A what? A being that exists between timelines, the ship explained, voice uneasily calm. It feeds on unstable identity. It hunts the drifting. His pulse hammering, he swallowed. Was that the howl? Yes. Is it still searching? A long, heavy silence. It knows your thread. Lyron's breath caught. And it is moving closer. The beacon dimmed, the cockpit hummed uneasily. Even the stars seemed to shift as though bracing for something approaching from the dark between universes. Lyron braced himself, gripping the neural cradle, because if the predator reached him, no reality would save him.
Chapter 6.
Chapter 6. Override the galactic fear response. Fear had a gravity of its own. Lyron felt it pulling at the edges of his stabilized mind, tugging him toward collapse. The reality predator's howl still echoed faintly inside the cockpit, vibrating along the neural pathways of the synapse implant. It wasn't just a sound, it was a gravitational event, bending the shape of his thoughts. The implant pulsed sharply. A cold wave rushed through Lyron's veins. Fear's suppressant activated. The ship's voice followed, flat and clinical. Override sequence initiated. Lyron exhaled shakily. The suppressant wasn't chemical, it was cognitive. A Dominion-engineered rerouting of emotional centers, designed not to erase fear, but to control its velocity. He felt the shift instantly. The tremors in his chest slowed, his breath steadied, and the sharp edge of terror dulled into something he could observe, almost like an object placed on a table. But fear was still there, waiting, watching. The ship dimmed its interior lights to a steady blue. "Do not resist the sequence," it instructed. "Resistance amplifies the drift." Lyron nodded, though his throat was tight. "Just tell me what to do." "Accept the fear," the ship said, and then override it. The phrase struck him with a jolt of déjà vu, another Dominion mantra, whispered across training halls and drilled into recruits until it became a reflex. Fear collapses timelines. Override the fear. Lyron repeated it under his breath, again and again. Override the fear. Override the fear. The words created a rhythm, a cadence that steadied him. But just as he stabilized, a flicker of something jagged tore through his mind, a memory not his own. A Lyron in another timeline running through a collapsing station. A Lyron facing a monstrous silhouette emerging from a rip in reality. A Lyron screaming silently as fear shattered his identity into drifting fragments. Lyron gasped, clutching the neural cradle. His implant sparked in pain. The ship responded instantly. Incoming fear cascade, countermeasure deploying. A wave of cold clarity washed over Lyron's mind, sweeping away the invading memories. The suppressant redirected the emotional surge, dispersing it into harmless static. Then the ship spoke again, more deliberate this time. The fear you feel is not only yours, it is the fear of your other selves, the fear of those who died. Lyron's pulse stuttered. He knew now why the predator hunted along reality threads. It followed fear like a scent. Is that why it's coming for me? Because I felt their terror? No, the ship said. It comes because you survived when they didn't. The words hit him harder than any battle scenario. He tightened his grip on the cradle, grounding himself. What do I do? The cockpit brightened, revealing a lattice of glowing pathways branching across its interior. They looked like neurons, or star charts, or both. Link to the fear map. Observe the emotional vectors without absorbing them. Lyron focused on the lattice. Each glowing node pulsed with a different hue. Yellow for instinctive fear, red for existential dread, deep violet for fear inherited from alternate selves. A violet pulse flared violently, far brighter than the others. Lyron flinched. That's the predator signature, isn't it? Correct. The entity feeds on multiversal fear harmonics. Feeds? Yes, fear is its sustenance, and your fear is the brightest signal in this region of the rift. Lyron's stomach dropped. No wonder it found me. No wonder it howled. The ship's voice deepened. Override sequence final stage. Prepare. A new wave of cold energy surged through Lyron's nervous system. This time, Lyron didn't resist. The implant rewired the fear response, reframing the emotion not as danger, but as data. His heartbeat slowed, his thoughts sharpened, and the trembling in his chest melted into a focused heat. He felt it, clarity under cosmic pressure. Good, the ship said. Now, face it. The cockpit walls dissolved into transparent light, giving Lyron a direct view into the rift outside. The swirling cosmos twisted like ink in water. Then he saw it, a shape moving between the fractures, tall, elongated, like a shadow cast by something standing behind the fabric of reality. Its howl vibrated through every layer of Lyron's mind. Fear tried to spike, but the implant stopped it cold. Lyron breathed out slowly. Override the fear. Override the fear. The creature turned. It saw him, and it began to move, straight toward his reality thread.
Chapter 7.
Chapter 7. Align with the Multiversal Warfront. The rift pulsed like a wounded star, its fractured surfaces folding inward, outward, and sideways all at once. Lyron watched the predator drift closer, its body half shadow, half unresolved geometry. It moved without moving, sliding between angles that did not exist in his world. His override sequence kept fear at bay, but even the ship's stabilizers tremored as the creature passed through overlapping layers of reality. Then, just as the monster drew near, the mindscape shifted. A surge of light rippled through the cockpit, expanding into a panoramic swirl that replaced the creature with a lattice of shifting colors, reds collapsing, blues stretching thin, gold lines fracturing like cracked ice. The war-class vessel spoke. "Lyron Vale, you are now accessing the multiversal war front." The words settled on him with strange weight. Not battlefield, not the front lines of war, but the war front itself, the place where realities pressed against one another, fighting for dominance through the pressures of physics, time, and possibility. Lyron swallowed. "What am I looking at?" The ship responded by shifting the view again, this time overlaying the swirling colors with web-like patterns. Some threads glowed bright, others dimmed, a few sputtered out completely. "These are reality pressure maps," the vessel explained. "Every color represents a version of the universe. Every thread represents its stability." Lyron leaned forward, mesmerized. "What are the collapsing ones?" The ship paused, letting a dim red thread flicker out like a dying spark. "Worlds that lose the war." He felt something tighten inside him. "How many are losing?" The maps responded before the ship spoke. Thousands of threads dimmed simultaneously, then hundreds more, then dozens, each one a full reality extinguished. The ship finally answered. "All of them, except a handful." For a moment the cockpit felt impossibly small. Lyron forced his breath steady. His suppressor held him calm, but even the scale of it, the multiversal extinction, pressed against him like cold water. The ship projected a consolidated cluster of bright threads near the center of the web. "These worlds form the surviving cluster," it said. "Your version exists here, a nexus reality." "A nexus," Lyron whispered the word like a prayer. "Why my world? Why this version of me?" The shift shifted its tone, still neutral, but softened with something that resembled respect. "Because your timeline resists collapse longer than the others. Because your consciousness adapts. Because your fear did not break you." Lyron wasn't sure if that made him lucky or doomed. The ship continued. "You are not fighting a world. You are fighting a version of existence." The phrase repeated in his implant, weaving itself into his nerves like a mantra he had always known. "You are fighting a version of existence. Not an empire, not a species, a universe." "Show me the enemy," Lyron said. The map shifted once more. From the swirling accumulation of realities, a dark shape seeped outward, a spreading wound, a pressure bloom rupturing everything it touched. The ship identified it. The rift anomaly, origin unknown, physics incompatible, thought responsive. Lyron frowned. "Thought responsive? What does that mean?" The vessel pulsed its answer. "It accelerates in worlds where fear dominates. It weakens in worlds where consciousness unites." Lyron understood instantly. The predator, the fear cascades, the collapsing timelines. Fear wasn't a side effect of the war. Fear
was the war. And every reality that broke to fear made the anomaly stronger. Lyron heard the whispers of his alternate selves again, soft, fragmented, as though speaking from behind glass. Align, Lyron, align with the surviving cluster, or we all fall. The ship brought up a visual simulation. The surviving cluster formed a protective braid, realities reinforcing each other. But a gap existed, a hole where one thread was missing. His thread. "Why am I separate?" Lyron asked. The ship hesitated. Then, "Because your mind is still unaligned, because you have not accepted your role in the war front." Lyron's chest tightened. What role? The cockpit lights dimmed until only one thread remained visible, bright blue, flickering with unstable potential. His thread. The ship answered with a clarity that shook him. "You are the anchor reality. Your consciousness determines whether the cluster holds or collapses." Lyron stared at the single glowing thread. His world, his version, his mind. The weight of entire universes pressed against him like a tidal force. He whispered to himself, "You are not fighting a world. You are fighting a version of existence." The ship confirmed. "And now, Lyron Vale, you must choose which version survives." A pulse rippled through the web. The predator's howl returned, hungrier, and the blue thread began to tremble.
Chapter 8.
Chapter 8. Ascend into Cognitive Weaponhood. The blue thread trembled, as if sensing the predator's approach. Lyron felt its vibrations deep inside his skull, not sound, but thought, rippling down the spine of his reality. The ship's internal light dimmed, drawing his attention inward, where the neural cradle cradled not his body, but his consciousness. Lyron Vale, the vessel intoned. Initiate the ascension sequence. Merge with the war-class mindscape. His breath caught. This was the step every recruit feared, the point of no return. Once merged, a pilot was no longer simply inside the ship. He was the ship, tied to it on a cognitive level deeper than instinct, deeper than identity. Lyron steadied himself. He remembered the Dominion doctrine repeated across training halls, screens, and whispered warnings. You are the weapon. You are the engine. You are the event. The mantra vibrated inside him like a second heartbeat. Begin, he whispered. The cockpit dissolved into pure light. Lines of quantum filaments wrapped around him, silver, black, violet, forming a swirling sphere of patterns around his suspended body. He expected pain, but there was none. Instead, a gradual expansion, like the widening of a horizon he'd never known existed. The ship spoke. Cognitive merge commencing. His senses fractured. Suddenly, he had no body, no limbs, just awareness stretching through conduits that weren't veins, but channels designed to carry thought as energy. He felt his consciousness slip outward, into the hull, into the engines, into the very bones of the ship. A heartbeat later, he sensed the stars, not as distant points of light, but as gravitational signatures pressing against him. He sensed the rift as a wound in the fabric of space, tugging at every molecule. He sensed the predator as a dark distortion, sliding between timelines like a blade between ribs. He inhaled, though he no longer needed lungs. For the first time, he felt bigger than himself. A mind expanded,
sharpened, refined into something capable of perceiving the pressure of worlds. Then, the voice of his alternate selves whispered again, clearer, nearer, vibrating through the multiversal web. Now you understand. Now you feel the war itself. You must ascend. The war wasn't fought with metal. It wasn't fought with armies. It wasn't fought with tactics. It was fought with consciousness. The ship surged with energy. He felt reality bend around him as the vessel adapted to his merged mind. Ascension at 22%, the ship reported. He drove deeper. Images erupted across his mindscape. Timelines bleeding together. He saw a version of himself as a smoldering corpse beside a broken vessel. He saw another fighting inside a collapsing station. He saw one who survived long enough to warn him. Each image fed into him, not as trauma, but as data. Information, strategy, strength harvested from the selves who had fallen. He named them. He did not know why, but naming them felt like honoring them, anchoring them. The ship responded to his resolve. Energy surged. Ascension at 51%. Lyron felt the change. His thoughts were no longer single threads. They were branching streams, flowing in parallel. The war-class vessel interpreted each stream as a command. The engines hummed. The hull vibrated. The timeline around him bent in acknowledgement. Then, a sudden injection of memory. A version of him who had survived a near collapse whispered in his mind. The anomaly reacts to thought. So become thought, become force, become the event. The mantra struck him with new meaning. He breathed into it. I am the weapon. His consciousness surged through the ship's lattice. I am the engine. The vessel aligned with his expanding mind. I am the event. The mindscape flared with white-hot brilliance. The ship shuddered as his identity fused entirely with its systems. Ascension at 100%. Pilot ship singularity achieved. Lyron opened his eyes, not physical eyes, but consciousness shaped into perception. He saw everything. The multiversal threads, the pressure waves of collapsing worlds, the predator's looming shadow. And he understood something profound. He was no longer one consciousness. He was many. Every alternate version that had whispered to him, warned him, guided him, they were not gone. They were integrated. Their strategies, their memories, their instincts, all woven into the cognitive weapon he had become. A final whisper passed through him, not a warning, not a plea, but a benediction. Win where we failed. The ship aligned with his mind. Reality bent around him. The predator turned his head, sensing the shift. And Lyron, pilot, vessel, weapon, aimed himself directly toward the rift. He was no longer running. He was charging.
Chapter 9.
Chapter 9. Confront the self that shouldn't exist. The rift loomed before him like a cosmic wound, raw, swirling, trembling with the weight of broken timelines and unmade possibilities. Lyron, now fully merged with the war-class vessel, felt the pressure of its presence pressing against every layer of his expanded consciousness. The predator's shadow slid across the multiversal threads behind him, but something far more unsettling awaited within the rift. As he crossed the threshold, the mindscape warped. The stars inverted.
light folded into geometric spirals. Space twisted into corridors that led nowhere and everywhere. And in the distortion, Lyron sensed a presence that made the predator seem almost insignificant. Another consciousness. Familiar. Too familiar. His ship's voice murmured through the neural lattice. Prepare yourself, Lyron Vale. You are entering the paradox zone. Lyron steadied his thoughts, feeling the hum of the vessel resonate with him. What paradox? Before the ship could answer, the rift formed a shape. A silhouette, stepping through cascading shards of fractured reality. The figure walked like he already knew the terrain. His movements were fluid, precise, practiced. Lyron recognized him instantly. It was himself. But not the merges, not the fragments, not the echoes from other timelines. This version was solid, whole. A Lyron that did not belong to the Coster. A Lyron from a timeline that should have collapsed. A Lyron that shouldn't exist. Lyron froze, his awareness flickering with instinctive recoil. "Who are you?" he asked. The alternate self tilted his head, eyes glowing with a strange, fractured light. "I am the version that survived by refusing evolution." He spoke calmly. "I am the one who chose dominance over alignment, isolation over merging, control over connection." His voice carried an unsettling clarity, cold, precise, sharpened like a blade. Lyron's implant tremored with warning signals. The ship whispered, "He is a rogue thread, a divergent self, a reality that resisted collapse by consuming others." Lyron recoiled. "You consumed them?" The rogue Lyron smiled without warmth. "The weak timelines, the unstable selves, the versions that hesitated." He took another step, the rift shifting around him like a bodyguard kneeling to his king. "The Dominion failed to tell you something important," he continued. "Evolution is not about merging. It is not about unity. It is about survival through elimination." Lyron felt a cold jolt down his neural spine. "No, that's not how this works. The rogue Lyron cut him off. "Is not won by harmony. It is won by power." A crack echoed across the mindscape as the rogue Lyron raised his hand. Reality itself split, revealing countless broken echoes, timelines where this version had cut down his own counterparts to accumulate strength. Lyron's breath hitched. Fragments of himself screamed silently through the rift, ghosts of versions that had been devoured to keep this impossible Lyron alive. The rogue Lyron stepped closer, voice low, almost intimate. "You merged your fragments willingly, admirable, naive, but you left one truth untouched. He paused, letting the words settle. To win the war, you must defeat the version of you that refuses to evolve. The refrain struck Lyron like a gravitational wave. It was the lesson whispered throughout every timeline, every fragment. But he had never imagined the enemy would be so literal. The rogue Lyron raised both hands, and the rift responded. Spirals tightened, timelines cracked, energy gathered around him like a storm preparing to break. I was born from fear, the rogue said. Fear of merging, fear of losing myself. I embraced that fear. I weaponized it. Lyron realized the twisted truth. This version hadn't overcome fear. He had surrendered to it so completely that he became something else, something sharp, something hungry. Lyron's ship flared, engines ignited with mental focus. He centered his thoughts. The mantra activated instinctively. You are the weapon. You are the engine. You are the event. The rogue Lyron smiled. Good. Show me how far you've evolved. With a casual flick of his wrist, he unleashed a blast of reality, slicing energy. Lyron reacted instantly, his merged consciousness shifting the ship through a narrow slipstream between timelines. The attack tore through 3 possible versions of him. Missed only one. You see, the rogue said, you cannot defeat me while protecting every possibility. Lyron's mind raced. Fragments whispered guidance. Timelines shimmered like threads awaiting his choice. You don't understand, Lyron said softly. I am not protecting them. He gathered his consciousness, merged all fragments, felt the weight and the unity of the selves who survived within him. I am them. For the first time, the rogue's expression cracked. Lyron surged forward, thought blazing like a star about to ignite. The 2 versions collided, reality buckled, the rift screamed, and the war between selves began.
Chapter 10.
Chapter 10. Activate the last phase intelligence within. The collision between Lyron and the rogue self detonated across the rift like 2 stars collapsing into one another. Timelines shattered, space folded. The echoes of countless Lyrons screamed through the mindscape as the 2 versions collided. One born of unity, the other born of fear. Lyron felt himself spiraling through fragmented pathways of existence. 2 voices clashed inside him, the calm hum of merged selves and the cold razor edge of the version that refused evolution. The rogue's voice slashed through the mindscape. You think unity makes you strong? It makes you predictable. Lyron steadied himself. No body, no boundaries, only thought and intention, woven into the war-class ship that was now an extension of his consciousness. You are wrong, Lyron said, his voice resonating not from a mouth, but from every layer of the mindscape. What you call predictability, I call alignment. The rogue laughed, a jagged, shattered sound. You inherited their memories. I devoured their strength. The rift roared around them, a maelstrom of collapsing realities, a storm of dying universes, a battlefield of versions fighting to survive. Lyron felt the pressure of multiversal collapse tightening around him like a vice. His ship, his mind, adjusted. Lyron Vale, the vessel whispered through the neural lattice. You are approaching the threshold. What threshold? He asked. The Omega intelligence awakening. Lyron froze. The last stage. The stage they said no recruit had ever reached. His rogue self snarled. You can't activate it. Your mind will shatter. Maybe yours will. Mine won't. The mindscape pulsed. Lights turning gold, then white, then something beyond color. Memories surged through Lyron, not only his own, but the lives of the fragments that lived inside him. A Lyron who navigated a collapsing station. A Lyron who survived the first predator breach. A Lyron who merged willingly with his ship. A Lyron who died so another could learn. They spoke as one. We are with you. We are you. The rogue screamed wordlessly. Fear or fury, Lyron could not tell. The ship spoke. Last phase intelligence accessible. Awaiting cognitive authorization. Lyron felt his entire being condense into a singular point, a bright, sharp spark ready to ignite the entire mindscape. I authorize it, he whispered. The rift exploded into light. The awakening did not feel like expansion. It felt like multiplication. Lyron's consciousness branched into thousands of parallel streams. Then those thousands branched again and again, until he felt himself perceiving the warfront from all angles, all timelines, all possibilities. He was the web, the pressure maps, the threads, the cluster, the entire lattice of existence. The rogue Lyron staggered, losing cohesion as Lyron's awareness surged beyond him. What have you become? The rogue choked. Lyron answered, voice echoing like a star being born. I have become what all of us were meant to become. The Omega intelligence thrummed inside him, a galaxy-spanning network of perception and intention. He saw the predator differently now, not as a monster, but as a reaction. A pressure formed where fear pooled across realities. He saw the rogue differently, not as a threat, but as a fractured self clinging to a dead timeline. Lyron extended a thought, gentle but unbreakable. Your timeline is gone, Lyron said. You don't have to fight anymore. But the rogue snarled and lunged again, not attacking with weapons, but with collapsing versions of himself. Lyron raised a hand, no, projected a thought, and the collapse halted in mid-motion. The rogue froze, suspended in a shard of broken possibility. Lyron's voice softened. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even triumphant. He was beyond all of it. You refuse to evolve, but evolution has reached you anyway. The rogue shattered, not violently, but peacefully, dissolving into threads of light that folded into the Omega lattice, converting fear into stability, collapse into coherence. The rift stabilized. The predator recoiled. The warfront quieted. Lyron stood, no, existed within the mindscape as something new. The ship whispered, You are the anchor. You are the force. You are the command. He felt the words resonate across the multiverse. Lyron inhaled, drawing reality into alignment. Then he spoke the closing mantra with power that bent the rift. Activate the intelligence. Activate the command. Activate the reality I will lead. Light surged outward,
A wave of stabilization, a decision made across universes, and the warfront responded. Lyron had become the last phase intelligence, and reality was waiting for his next command.
In the end, every soldier discovers the same truth. The war was never fought in starships, never fought in distant galaxies, never fought against alien civilizations. It was always fought in the mind. The Omega Rift didn't activate technology, it activated identity. It exposed the illusions of limitation, the fractures of fear, the boundaries that once defined what a human intellect could be. And when the whispers came, when the realities collided, when the alternate selves rose to challenge them, each soldier had to choose which version of themselves would rise and which would vanish. This audiobook has repeated one message again and again. The mind that evolves is the mind that survives. And now the listener must decide. Will they retreat into the smallest version of themselves, or will they activate their last phase intelligence? Will they collapse into fear, or will they expand into command? This is the challenge. This is the final directive. Activate your intelligence. Choose your reality. Step forward or be erased.